David, in a decisive departure from global warming, it's expected to reach 16 degrees in New York City today. How are you, David?
I'm very well. And is that considered hot or cold?
Well, 16 degrees Fahrenheit, it's pretty cold.
Oh, that's cold. Right. Well, we got to keep the edge on the envelope of myth.
The boot edge.
Mm.
These
Who
are
incidentally is
American
a great
jokes.
fan of the global warming,
Buttigieg
or
is?
at least how to control it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a dope.
And
I'm pretty
apparently the
sure.
go ahead, sorry.
No. After you.
The BBC has just launched a science program that focuses on the young 13-year-old girl who believes that we're responsible for catastrophic anthropogenic
Oh,
global warming.
Greta
So
Thunberg,
that's
you
a
mean?
measure. Yeah, that's a measure of the scientific capabilities of the BBC. So we can probably address some of that.
I don't know if the BBC is that scientifically capable. They've got a lot of weird statues outside their place, as you and I have documented and observed. David, I think a lot of people who
Right.
are watching us are aware that you and I, every Friday, have a sponsor-exclusive broadcast that people can watch on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. That's going to be starting in just 1 hour at 2 p.m. Eastern. And David, we're doing something new and unique today. We're also doing an audio-only simulcast, our new podcast, which is going to be available to people who are following Crowdsource the Truth on Spreaker. And soon after it goes up there, I'm going to submit it to the iTunes podcast thing on Apple. And so hopefully this will open us up to a much larger audience. A lot of people have been asking me for about 3 years since I started Crowdsource the Truth to create an audio-only version of the show. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's wonderful, and you know how technophobic I am, in spite of my background in artificial intelligence and these obscure activities. But and I'd like to thank you for getting my playlist up to date, because I've been struggling with that, and it was falling further and further behind. So I'm very pleased that you managed to get that at my website. Over to you.
Exactly, and people can see that at reversecsiscripts.com, your website. The playlist that you're talking about, David, of course, is available right here. And that is the playlist of our YouTube videos. There's been a series of upgrades that I've made here at the studio at the outset of 2020. First, taking the show to full 1080p HD at a higher bit rate, developing this 32-bit audio pipeline in part to enable these audio-only live streaming podcasts on iTunes and Spotify and Spreaker and some of these other platforms. There have been a little bit of bumps in the road. I think progress, David, never arrives without a couple of face plants. You're never going to achieve anything new without risking the possibility of failure. So while we work through some of the technical hurdles, I'm making some ongoing changes. This weekend, I'm going to be making a number of upgrades here in the studio that are focused not on improving the quality of the presentation so much as improving the reliability and eliminating any of these technical foibles that sometimes get in the way. I hope, David, by next week, we'll be broadcasting via fiber optic. I've made a lot of changes here
Wow.
to allow the installation of a fiber optic connection, and hopefully the speed that will bring will also improve the productions.
Well, I think we'll barely recognize ourselves. You use that term face plant, and I find as I get older, once I've done a plant, it's harder and harder to pick myself up and shake the dirt off my face and continue on. But I think we're a great team, Jason.
Yes, I agree with that, David. And boy, I'm looking here on the YouTube broadcast, and it seems that by focusing my attention on the on the podcast, I might have made an error in programming the live stream. So we've got people viewing us Yeah, I did make an error. So we are live streaming on YouTube right now, but it's not at the link that I put out earlier. So I want to thank everybody who's found us here. David, we've been talking a lot about technical stuff and housekeeping, but of course today on our show, we're going to be discussing this BBC AI patent that you are wondering if it is perhaps playing a role in spreading this panic, this pandemic, and all the information surrounding the coronavirus. What do you want to share with us in this regard today?
Well, it's worth just going back into the philosophy behind the patent, and particularly this concept of Crown rights rules, which applies to the British or English Crown, where the Crown is entitled to use any patented issues. And going back to World War II with the Tizard mission, the Brits sent over a lot of very key technologies, including the proximity fuse and friend or foe detection and radar stuff in the Tizard mission to the United States, shared that technology with the Americans, particularly interested in my case, in the proximity fuse, which was then manufactured by RCA. And I believe the two countries, the British and the Americans, made a kind of Crown rights rules working arrangement where when either country issued a patent, the other country had the rights to use it. Now, fast forward to the present, the recent present, let's say going back to 1998, the BBC filed a patent application, I think on the 3rd of August of 1998, for what they called a spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals, which I think you and I found a wording somewhat strange. And what I've been intrigued by is, what is the nature of those television signals? Could they be what I believe in the theater world are called blocking notes or digital blocking notes, sent to people, for example, at a crime scene before the crime occurs, to get them in the crime scene removing evidence? Or in the case of Jane Stanley in New York, where potentially, as she reads from the prompter, we are getting news that the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed. A signal might go to the demolition crew to bring the building down. And of course, as we know, one of the great anomalies of 9/11 is that when she read that out from her prompter, the building appears to still have been standing over her left shoulder.
David, let me just ask you to mind that microphone. It seems to be dragging on a zipper on your jacket, and it's making a lot of noise. There we go.
Okay, all right, I'll hold it.
So we've got the patent here.
Okay. Yes, that's right. So that would allow the party injecting or inserting the text to present it to the newsreader, who totally innocently and naively just reads what is in front of her. But there's some interesting artificial intelligence elements to that, because the way the patent is presented is the AI looks at the speed that the person is reading and matches that up to a limited vocabulary, right? Because she's not going to be using a lot of words that differ from what is the text, and slows or speeds up the processing so that it follows her natural rhythm of reading. Now, the television signals that are generated could be going anywhere, but in particular, what interests me is, could they be going back into the patent office to patents, for example, the Jerome Lemelson patent, which talks about the tracking of prisoners using artificial intelligence algorithms.
And the great danger there, of course, David, because what you're touching on, and I want to apologize to people who feel that I'm interrupting, but part of the issue that I'm trying to overcome is that I've got over a 1-second delay in my ear. So if I want to accentuate a point that you're making or add anything, I sort of have to interrupt. I'm hopeful that the addition of fiber optic will eliminate or reduce that. But what you're talking about right now is so critical to everything that we discuss on Discovery CSI. It's the patent office and how these patents are shared, this agreement that you're speculating about with regard to the Crown rights and the United States and the United Kingdom being able to share patents. It's very similar to the Five Eyes arrangement. So it's easy to see how something like that could in fact exist, and very probably does. I would also
add... And it's
add...
existed for decades.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, David.
So, yeah, no problem. And I understand that delay is difficult perhaps for the listeners to understand, but that's okay. I'm fine with that. Now, let's just go back to some of the key players, perhaps in the manipulation of that relationship between the BBC and its patent for spoken text, and the patent office and the various patentees that stand to make a great deal of money or lose a great deal of money if that patent is abused or ignored. Now, coming back to the coronavirus, one of the things that intrigues me is the vectorization of the pandemic panic. So there's two things going on here. There's the vectors which control the movement of the virus, and the vectors that control the movement of fake news about the virus. And those two things synchronized can offer an opportunity to manipulate public perceptions in a way that can make a great deal of money or establish a great deal of control over the public. So right now, I think the top 19 cities in terms of the surveillance of the public, all of them are in China except one, which is in London. That is to say, the London citizen or the British citizen in London and the Chinese are now in a virtual total 24/7 surveillance mode that is headed for, in the particular case of the coronavirus, a lockdown of China, which of course represents a huge extension of the Communist Party control over the Chinese. And if it can be presented around the world as a global threat, we may start seeing a lockdown or vastly expanded surveillance using these various patented devices around the world and in London in particular. So we have an extraordinary jump into, I guess, the philosophy of 1984 and the inner party that perhaps we can help to expose and protect the citizen against. Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, and you had pointed out pretty early on, David, this patent here, which is held by the Pirbright Institute, it says it's for coronavirus. And there was a huge effort earlier, I guess last week, where they put out a ton of articles saying that no, Bill Gates doesn't have a patent on the coronavirus and he's not predicting anything about the coronavirus. But, this is a patent held by the Pirbright Institute, which on its own website, it tells us that one of their major stakeholders is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, I mean, where's the disconnect here?
Well, there is no disconnect, and this comes back to a vector analysis of the patent itself, which is, a description in text, and the patent as a reality, which is a virus that can be carried as a bioweapon sample. For example, there was this news, I think in last year or maybe the year before, of a Chinese-born woman who is a microbiologist working at the National Microbiological Laboratory in Winnipeg, and she's escorted off the premises with all her students. I don't know how many students had come from China. This is a level 4 laboratory, and the RCMP and the various other parties are desperately anxious to prove she didn't go off with samples that might have gone back to Wuhan city, where there's another biological level 4 lab, and possibly join the infection chain where the virus was planted at various key points in Wuhan city to provoke or promote or basically trigger a pandemic fear of coronavirus going around the world. So there's three situations. There's a Pirbright Institute that has a coronavirus patent where they used reverse genetics to attenuate the virus for use in protecting birds from, I guess, a variety of bird flu. You got a Chinese-born microbiologist escorted off the premises and sent, to the best of my knowledge, back to China. And then, amazingly, in your backyard, you have the Pierre Hotel Event 201 pandemic, where they rehearsed and simulated a coronavirus pandemic around the world that would have resulted in 65 million dead. Now, when I talk about vector analysis, I want to know where the intellectual property is going through the system, where the fake news is going through the system, where the virus itself is going through the system, and the possibility that there is a vaccine that's already being developed at the Pirbright Institute using reverse genetics that is being held back as a form of blackmail or extortion to leaders in various countries around the world who might face the threat of actually the virus being planted in their countries or in their cities. Over to you.
Yeah, and so what I did yesterday, David, is I just basically typed Pirbright Institute into Google Earth here, and there aren't a lot of spots close by this thing that allow you to sort of plant down your little Google Earth Street View person. I noticed that a lot of this is sort of, this is an industrial park surrounded by a fence, sort of in the middle of the woods. Like if you walk by the street here, you can't really see what's going on in this place. And let's see if we try to drop our guy. Maybe I was using Google Maps, but there's not a lot of places you can really drop this little guy to try to see what's going on in the Pirbright Institute. This is a bit of a risky move. It sometimes causes the computer to crash. Oh, here we go. This is where I was looking. If you drop the guy on this blue line, see, all this other stuff is sort of off limits. But if we drop it over here, there's some pharmaceutical company in here, a French pharmaceutical company. So, we hear that Bill Gates is one of the stakeholders of this thing. What do we think about this Pirbright Institute?
Well, the interesting thing about these institutes is they do contract research for government and various other private interests. What happens, of course, is of real interest is where does the intellectual property end up? It's embedded or embodied in a patent application, which may be granted. The world's leading processor of American patents is SERCO, the British company, which uses artificial intelligence algorithms to process. And I think in November the 17th of last year, it had processed 4 million patents using artificial intelligence techniques or algorithms for the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And I shake my head because you met with Wilbur Ross, right, who is the Commerce Secretary and the de facto cabinet member responsible, presumably, for what goes on in the Patent Office. And he appeared not to want to talk about, or not even to know, that the British company SERCO was operating the Patent Office. Yeah. Now let's go on from there and how dangerous that might be. If you take that BBC patent for the spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals, what happens if the generation of the television signals are actually digital blocking notes or vectors that would allow the BBC insiders, let's call it the inner party, to synchronize the vectors that are sent to, I think they call them the game characters or the character classes at a crime scene, so that, for example, outside the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11, you have a group of people that are deployed to the Pentagon before the attack on the Pentagon, and their job is acting as environmental cleaners. So they're told, using this generation of the television signals, which could be thought of as digital blocking notes or vectors, you go to the Pentagon lawn, you present yourself on the Pentagon lawn at 9:30 in the morning, or even a little bit earlier. You wait till the whiz bangs go off, and then you go and you pick up all of the evidence on the Pentagon lawn and take it away, which for me is a felony. Now, the point is about that character class or game characters, I would predict, Jason, First of all, they're not FBI, even if they're wearing FBI t-shirts, and they're totally innocent of any conspiracy. So what really, to find the conspiracy, you need to go back down the vectors that put them there and find out who had the human intelligence, the signals intelligence, and the financial intelligence to deploy to what is, I think we're increasingly understanding, was live action role play that resulted in the death of everyone in the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center and the American Navy, as far as I'm concerned, going to sleep for a long, long time. Over to you.
Very quickly, David, we had a question earlier coming from Ian asking if you're still flooded out, and you are, of course, now at an Airbnb, not your normal apartment. There was a major flood there, and so David is enduring that. I hope that people who are watching us on Patreon or Subscribestar or any of the Crowdsource the Truth channels will visit patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards. Sponsor David. We couldn't do these shows each week without David. I also want to thank John Doe for utilizing Super Chat on Crowdsource the Truth 2 on YouTube. That's another way people can support the show. So David, the thing I want to clarify about these television signals, and the reason why I found it so strange, is that the notion that some AI-driven teleprompter, which is essentially what the patent and the abstract are leading us to believe this is some more sophisticated version of a teleprompter. It's weird to me to say that the teleprompter invention itself is generating the television signals. I suppose we could say, in some exploration of the semantics of that statement, that this person being caused to speak and move and excite the photons that are entering the lens of the camera and striking the photoelectric sensor in there that turns the photons into a digital image and then broadcasts them. Yes, I suppose it is indirectly generating television signals, but the concept of television signals is quite broad, David. It includes visual images like this picture of you that's coming to me, the audio of my voice. If people are hard of hearing, they might get closed caption signals in there. You get vertical blanking signals in an analog television signal. So there's all kinds of signals that can be embedded, all kinds of information that could be embedded. And in fact, there could be quite a bit of information that is embedded in a television signal that perhaps an analog television or a black and white television, for instance, it's receiving part of the television signal, but not the color portion of it. So a television signal could be embedded with multiple layers of different signals, whether they be text, as you're saying, geo-referenced data, blocking notes, etc. All of that could be embedded within a television signal, and that would essentially be covered by this weird BBC AI patent.
You've nailed it. You see, so for example, the geo-referenced signals or the television signals could include vectors that are injected into the navigation system of the Mercedes that took Princess Diana into the 13th column of the road tunnel under the Pont d'Armor Bridge, or took Michael Hastings into the tree, which ultimately was a very fiery series of explosions, and killed him. So then you've got this extraordinary possibility where, as the newsreader, either before or after a crime, where let's call it potentially a contract hit, is delivering to the public what the public is supposed to believe, simultaneously with that, there are character classes or game characters, for example, what we call the social engineers, being deployed to divert and decoy public attention away from what they want to conceal, which is a conspiracy. So, for example, you and I want to talk a little bit about Christine Marcy, if I may, have been hammered, or various people have been hammered at something years ago where I found this reference to Mendenhall's baby in an article in the Washington Post of, I think, sometime in 1979. that talks about Mendenhall's baby. And subsequently, some social engineers got in contact with the Washington Post and said that was a typo. What it actually was meant was Marcy's baby, because it's Christine Marcy. And the Washington Post, through its optical character recognition, which potentially could have been activated by television signals from this spoken text display apparatus of the BBC. But
Well, wait a
setting
minute.
that
We're
aside
getting
for
a
the
bit
moment.
far afield there. I want to make sure we don't mix too many hypothetical scenarios because
Okay, all right, okay.
yeah, well, let's just cover this for a second because I'm hopeful that we've got kind of a new audience with us today. Now that we are also podcasting, this will eventually go out on iTunes and Spotify and other places. So let's talk about this for a second, David, because it is important, this class of social engineers. So one of the things I love about you, David, is that you'll come out with a statement that the uninitiated might hear and say, what, that sounds ridiculous. How could this guy possibly say that? But when you drill in to the details of the statement, I find you are so frequently on the money, it's just astounding. So here is this article from the Washington Post that was written in 1979. It was originally published August 8th, 1979 at noon, and written by Judy Mann, who unfortunately passed on in, I think, 2003 or 2006. So we can't consult her as to what was originally intended to be said. But of course, you introduced me to this bit of information in probably around 2017 or 18. So my only exposure to this article titled "Now You Can Be Both, Mother and Professional," my only exposure to this was on the WashingtonPost.com. And when I first became aware of this article, although it's all about Christine Marcy, who was a high-level government bureaucrat in 1979, the opening line said Christine Mary. So there was quite an obvious typo there because several other times throughout the article she's referred to by her proper name, Christine Marcy. And it tells us about how she's a super grade in the OPM and she had her first child 2.5 years ago. But originally when we started evaluating this article, it said she had her first chili 2.5 years ago, which contextually to a human did not make sense. This is an article about how she's a professional and a mother, so talking about her adventures in Mexican dining doesn't seem to make sense. This quite clearly was intended to say her first child. Now, setting aside those two seeming typos, elsewhere in the article down below here, it did say in 1979 that Mendenhall's baby was due in early August. Now, when people read this article now, they could be quite easily convinced that videos that you and I have put out in the past examining this information were incorrect because this article now says Marcy's baby. However, when this all came about and was brought to our attention by one of these malicious social engineers, and I got to thank John Doe for the $10 super chat on Crowdsource the Truth 2 on YouTube. He's telling us that his brother works for the CDC and he's forwarding everything on the coronavirus to his brother. That's good to know. But back to the article, David. After these social engineers called the Washington Post and lied, said that you and I had somehow manipulated this article, we're not really clear on who got it to change, but on March 25th, of 2019, these typos were corrected. I should go back to some of our older videos to get the copies, the screen captured online copies of the WashingtonPost.com that show the previous errors. But when I went to the New York Public Library and obtained the microfilm of the original newspaper as printed in 1979, sure enough, it does say that Mendenhall's baby was due in early August, and I've gone to some great lengths to try to get the Washington Post to put the Washington Post online article, the WashingtonPost.com article, back to the original form where it says Mendenhall's baby. They have refused. They have said that there's nothing that they can do about it, and my complaint has gone all the way up, David, to the executive editor, Martin Barron. They've refused.
Well, it's gone further than that. I can guarantee, or at least I believe very strongly, I believe it's reached the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos. This comes back to my basic thesis. This is an extraordinarily important example of the George Orwell's concept of the ministry of truth, where they spend all their time readjusting history and the records, like Mendenhall's baby, to make sure that it adheres to the doctrine being promoted for the, let's call it the BBC inner party. So let's just take a quick look and bring me back if you think this is a diversion, but I think this is critically important to this woman, Christine Marcy. And I'll give you some highlights of her career in 1968, 1978, 1988, 1998, and 2008. So she joined the Office of Economic Opportunity in 1968. Her first three bosses that would play a major role in the stand down of the United States on 9/11 were successively Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and Frank Carlucci, who would go on to become the chairman of the Carlyle Group during the 9/11 attack and had actually met with the bin Laden brother the night before. In 1978, it would appear she conceives Mendenhall's baby, probably around November of 1978. Now, in Washington, in November of 1978, there was one Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Winston Churchill, who was the personal assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and he would have been in a position to be the father of Mendenhall's baby. Now, was he? Well, we've done some interesting morphing with some images, but I'll move on. In 1988, Christine Marcy calls her brother, Field McConnell, and asks him how she should handle a mutiny on the plane, a Boeing 727, as I understand, flying federal marshals prisoner escort program or prisoner transportation program. And she occasionally wanted to fly these prisoners on civilian airlines. And what she was told was the civilian airlines don't like prisoners shackled to the plane. And so she asked Field, a very experienced pilot, how he would handle a mutiny. And he said, you drone the planes. So Christine Marcy, in 1988, the year of the management buyout by SERCO, the world's largest air traffic controller, knew about droning planes to prevent a mutiny. In 1998, right, Christine Marcy was then she'd stopped being the senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service and become the chief operating officer of the Small Business Administration just before BBC filed this patent application. I think it was around the 3rd of August 1998 for a spoken text display apparatus for the generation of television signals. On the 7th of August 1998, there was an attack on the American East African embassy in Nairobi and in Dar es Salaam. And I believe the BBC, for a variety of reasons, was actually injecting digital blocking notes or vector signals to the various parties responsible for the attack on the East African embassies. In 2008, you had the Mumbai massacre, and I don't know if you remember the essence of that, but basically they shot up and killed a whole bunch of people in the Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai, and they brutally tortured some people. And do I understand Shabad House? Is that the correct pronunciation? Are you familiar with the concept of Shabad?
CH?
Oh, Chabad. Okay, sorry
Chabad,
about the pronunciation.
Chabad. You got to have like that Jewish pronunciation. I'm trying to keep up, David. I've just got the Tanzania. Hopefully next week when the fiber optic arrives, I'll be able to have these images at the ready more quickly. One funny side note while I've got your attention, John Doe, who's been very generous with the super chat, is going to change the name of his band to Mendenhall's Baby.
Oh, wonderful. right? But anyway, so let's just go back to, so why are the social engineers spending so
But what
much
happened with
time
Chabad
trying
House?
to?
They bombed it?
No, they there were some people in Chabad House who were brutally tortured to death. Now we know all about torture because of the activities of Starnet, but let's just back up here and look at the role of Christine Marcy and ask our question: why do the social engineers treat it as so important that I and Field McConnell, the brother of Christine Marcy, lied about her being the founder of the Senior
Right.
Executive Service, the
Yes,
most
they're
powerful
very
bureaucratic
hung up
group
on
in government?
that, David. We should put an official
Now,
statement
I
on record about, is that correct or incorrect?
right. Now, what's interesting is they say that I lied about Christine Marcy being the founder of the senior executive. I didn't lie. I was misinformed. I inferred from the various articles that were written that she was the founder. But what's more interesting, and this is the result of the bad guys having a B team and not an A team, in the individual's research into who did found the senior executive service, the individual came up with two names: President Jimmy Carter and Alan Scotty Campbell, Scotty being his nickname, the director of the Office of Personnel Management at around that time. So I dug into the background of President Carter and Alan Campbell, and to my astonishment, I found out that they were both members of Phi Beta Kappa, the most
Interesting.
prestigious academic honor society in the United States, founded in a very important year for the future of the United States of America, 1776, the same year as Kappa Beta Phi was founded, which only has one chapter left on Wall Street, and that chapter includes Wilbur Ross as a member and Michael Bloomberg.
Hmm.
And the name I forget now. It's the CEO, I believe, of BlackRock Inc., the world's largest shadow banker. So I've been thinking, wouldn't it be
Ooh,
interesting if
wait a minute.
Phi
Look at
Beta
this.
Kappa
Sorry, David.
and
You
Kappa,
see this?
what?
So I'm looking up Scotty Campbell,
Go
and
ahead.
Maxwell at the Syracuse University has the Campbell Public Affairs Institute. Is there any connection to Robert Maxwell? To Ghislaine Maxwell? Here's Alan Campbell
That I don't.
pictured with
That I don't know.
RFK.
Alan Campbell is dead now. Yeah, there he is. So
And he's the
Christine
dean of the
Marcy, I
Lyndon
believe,
Johnson School of Public Affairs, David. How do you feel about Lyndon Johnson?
right. Well, you were sending me off on another rabbit, so let's just hang back here. So I believe now, thank you to the B grade social engineer who's proving perhaps that I misrepresented Christine Marcy's role in the senior executive service. The work he did has identified two people who are members of Phi Beta Kappa who may have selected Christine Marcy to set up a network inside the senior executive service engaged in sexual entrapment and subsequent blackmail. So this is an extraordinary possibility of interpreting the career of Christine Marcy, who resigned from the civil service in September of 2001. I wonder what date she resigned on. Was it the 12th of September 2001? To try and remove the evidentiary trail that would have led investigators like you and I on a vector analysis of her deployment of any one of 50,000 small business administration 8A protege companies as decoys within the big defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon during the live action role play of 911 that resulted in the death of nearly 3,000 Americans and came very close to the overthrow of the American government. Over to you.
Well, the other thing I wanted to point out to you, David, sorry, hang on. I'm working on a solution to this audio flutter. It's hard to determine what's causing it, but I'll get it solved. The thing I wanted to point out to you, David, is that yesterday, Dr. Corsi on his show, Dr. Corsi's Prescription for America, pointed out this article from the Washington Examiner This was written in 2014 by the extremely prolific Luke Rosiak. I don't know if you're familiar with Luke, David, but he did some of the best reporting on the Imran Awan case, and he wrote a book about it. He's currently being sued by Imran Awan, which seems to be the favorite tactic of social engineers and dopes who don't like unfavorable information about them being exposed by reporters. But in this article, Luke talks about how getting fired is essentially mission impossible for bureaucrats in the Obama era. He talks about the senior executive service. I don't know if he's gone back far enough to the days of Scotty Campbell and Christine Marcy, but of course, really the most conspicuous thing about this effort being undertaken by these implausibly stupid social engineers is the notion that they're putting so much attention on it is in and of itself just worthy of our attention. Like, why do they care? If Christine Marcy started her own YouTube channel to say that what we were telling people about her was incorrect, or if she brought a lawsuit against us for defamation, I mean, certainly the precursor to a lawsuit for defamation would be a letter saying, you know, Mr. Hawkins, you've made certain statements that are incorrect. I didn't start this or that. This was my role. Please cease and desist from saying what you're saying. This is how normal people operate. When people put out lies about me, I contact them. I tell them this is a lie. You should take it down. Reasonable people do that. Social engineers who want to perpetuate a lie, they say, oh, well, you know, come sue me or whatever it is. Now, you mentioned also, David, this Mendenhall baby, Mendenhall's baby, and we've shown this video, which is, you know, no one is intended to take any action. No one should contact Jessica Marcy. We're just showing this video to demonstrate the remarkable visual similarity in the facial features of Nicholas Soames and the daughter of Christine Marcy, Jessica Marcy. We have no issue with Jessica Marcy. We're not accusing her of doing anything. This is a matter of major national importance. If we've got British members of parliament Mendenhalling, which essentially is a ritualistic form of rape, if we've got British members of parliament Mendenhalling U.S. government bureaucrats, I think that the public deserves to know what's going on there, because you've put together an incredible array of information, David, that leads us to believe that this is all part of an entrapment network, a hazing program within a supranatural fraternal society. And again, this is one of these statements that on its face just seems ridiculous. But when you look at that evidence, when you see the seemingly striking similarities in appearance between Jessica Marcy and Nicholas Soames, coupled with Nicholas Soames working for Mark Hatfield, being in Washington, D.C., the Washington Post's jealous guarding of this weird statement about Mendenhall's baby, saying that there's nothing that they can do to reinstate it. We haven't even gone into all the details and the effort that's been made to try to convince people that Rashad Mendenhall, very probably a member of the Boulay, that this whole sidetrack with him simulating a dry hump rape on television, that's got nothing to do with any of this, according to them, and we made it all up.
Well, and it's interesting because we also are moving, or have moved, into the world of face recognition techniques, refined and developed by a very interesting guy called Oliver Buck Revell, who was, I think, number 3 in counter propaganda or something like that at the FBI up to, I think, around 1994. And then he quit. And he started up an organization in Vancouver called Imagist Technologies, which gave way to face forensics. And what face forensics does, it looks at millions of pictures of hotel rooms and thousands, if not millions, of people who might be suspected of engaging in pedophile encounters with children, and thousands of pictures of abuse victims, child abuse victims. So Oliver Buck Revell was doing something really, really interesting in December of 1988 where Christine Marcy had just called her brother to find out how to control a mutiny of prisoners on a plane, and he had told her how to drone a plane. And I believe he may have found some planes that she could acquire for the United States Department of Justice. But Oliver Buck-Revel is said to have gone onto the tarmac at Heathrow Airport and take his son or daughter-in-law, or the daughter and son-in-law, I forget which, off Pan Am 103 before it took off to be blown up after a frequency change over Lockerbie. So what did he know and when did he know it? I suggest that Oliver Buck-Revel was part of this network of high-speed communication systems that were clipped in or integrated with a world-class, if that's the right word, injector of fake news, the BBC. Because if you look at the BBC, it's done stories on all of these events, like the bombing in Nairobi, attributed to ISIS. It's done obviously huge material or information about what happened on 911. Essentially, I'm alleging that the BBC is producing fake CSI scripts where it's pretending to do some kind of investigation of a crime, but actually it's using live action role play in its broadcasts of crime scene investigation scripts to disguise the vectors that send the weapons and the killers and the money and the news in and out of a crime scene. That if the public can learn how to, with us, track back, a signals intelligence network, financial intelligence network, and the human intelligence network like Con Air, they may find that it comes back to one or two individuals, possibly including Christine Marcy, and what I would describe as a potential father of Mendenhall's baby, Nicholas Soames in London, who from 1994 to 1997 was the Minister of State for the Armed Forces in the John Major government. His brother would go on to become the Chief Executive Officer of SERCO. And essentially you got the grandchildren or grandsons of Winston Churchill potentially controlling the senior executive service through someone like Christine Marcy, which of course would change the dynamics, the political dynamics of events such as the coronavirus being spread around the world in a contrived pandemic. Over to you.
Yeah. David, we've got just a few minutes left here on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook, and now on Spreaker and Spotify, and eventually iTunes. We're going to be heading over to Subscribestar and Patreon in just a few minutes. People are going to be able to watch the in-depth deep dive into all of these and other matters on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I want to thank everybody who's utilized Super Chat on Crowdsource the Truth 2 on YouTube. David, the social engineers announced in December their plans to basically deplatform Crowdsource the Truth. So we're working to counteract that by creating the audio-only podcast and encouraging people to become sponsors on Patreon and Subscribestar. There's a lot of techniques that the social engineers use to try to attack videos on YouTube. There's a well-established method, and they're very familiar with the techniques that they can use to strike videos. YouTube doesn't really adhere to the law in as much as they adhere to their own policies, which are far more draconian. I've found that some of these other services that I'm describing, they base their copyright policies and their privacy policies and their various policies much more on the law than they do with YouTube. So people need to actually take legal action, as they should, to challenge some of these things. It's a matter of public interest to discuss these items. Last thing I want to tell you from the comments here, David, John Doe, very generous on the Super Chat. He's telling us that BBC, SERCO, Christine Marcy, Las Vegas shooting, and the Boulay, the SES, the Clinton Foundation, etc. These are all the topics that we're talking about. You, of course, David, I don't know if people realize this, you introduced me to Bishop Gators, and Bishop Gators' show has become very popular. He's talking from a completely different perspective and a completely different background about a lot of these fraternal societies, these bureaucrats that kind of sit atop, beneath, behind, embedded in the governments of these various powerful countries and can have major impact on international policy.
Jason, could you just give me 2 minutes on my...
Sure.
I've just noticed that my cover for the reverse CSI scripts has been updated by my webmaster, so I probably did that today. And there are a few changes that perhaps I could draw people's attention to clarify, because I think this is actually a very powerful visual metaphor for what I think I'm trying to do and succeeding with your wonderful help, right? So let me just see if you got that up.
I do. Can you see that?
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Okay. All right. So let's just look at some of the highlights there. What I've done, most obviously, is there's an old map. I would think it's about the turn of the century, 1910 kind of era, which shows what is known as the all red line, which is the cable telegraph links that put together or clip together or help to integrate the British Empire, if that's the right term, back to the colonies, with the first link being laid between, I think, Ireland and Newfoundland. That was in 1848. Above and below the line of longitude, there's a clock at the top, which is, I think, patented in 1848. And the clock at the bottom is the dial, the analog dial for Zulu time, which is tied or synchronized to the National Physical Laboratory clock in Teddington in Middlesex, which was invented, I think, in 1954, and with subsequent modifications is accurate to 1 second in 154 billion years. Ooh. Over on the left-hand side, go ahead, sorry?
That's a lot of time.
That's right, it's going to see us out. But over on the left-hand side at the top, I put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people who are absolutely key to the patenting and development of the high-speed communications technology that controls our internet and our public perceptions of the news today. Over on the left is a guy called John Harrison, who died in 1776, and he invented and built the marine chronometer and won the longitude prize from the Admiralty. I think it was 20,000 guineas, a huge amount of money, to help the people develop a good sense of where they were in space. William Cook was the British inventor, and Samuel Morse was the American inventor of the cable telegraph or telegrams. Marconi demonstrated the wireless telegraph at Toynbee Hall in 1899. And by the time the Titanic sank, I think there were at least 100 or more ships crossing the Atlantic that would have been in communication with each other and on the timing and instructions that could be relayed by telegraph. And Charles Kao is KAO, is a Nobel Prize winner, and he invented the fiber optic link, which now connects a lot of the hotels around the world. But anyway, I'd like people just to look at that page. Over on the right-hand side, there's a revised summary of what I'm trying to do we license blocking note vector analysis of CSI scripts. Over on the left, we've got this logo of the binoculars, where we are looking at the criminals and they are looking at us. And unless we understand how they're modifying their behavior when they recognize what we're doing, we will ultimately lose to a racketeering influence and criminal organization that I believe connects the two secret societies, Phi Beta Kappa and Kappa Beta Phi, to the events that we would include the London Underground bombing, the death of Princess Diana, etc., etc. So there's a lot to look at, but I'd really love people to look at that new or upgraded cover page and make their comments, and I'd be delighted to hear what their opinion is. Over to you, Jason.
Wonderful, yes. And of course, you're talking about reversecsiscripts.com, a great way for people to stay on top of all the videos that David and I are doing here on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook, etc. You can also follow David on Twitter if you're not already. He's there at CSI Hawkins. He posts a lot of interesting information there. David, we're going to head over now to our sponsor exclusive show on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So we'll see everybody there in just about 5 minutes. David, I'm looking forward to the show.
Thank you, Jason. Bye now.
And thanks everybody for watching.